So, maybe we'll go through a revolution. Maybe my book, Bernardo always publishes nonfiction. And I believe my book is the first work of fiction that he has published, it's the first novel. Fiction is a great way of communicating with larger audiences, I think, possibly in the nonfiction. So I'm hoping this finds an audience.
And when I started to read your book, the epigraph, also just I was immediately into that. The quote from John Maddox regarding Rupert Sheldrake. I vividly remember when I first heard about the whole affair back there in 2018. I was just what's the word? Flabbergasted, like burning the book. What the hell is going on?
Right, right.
So
And
how did you find this? When did you hear about the affair? Why is it? Why do you use this as a epigraph for your book? And let's start from there.
Okay. Well, I've heard Rupert cite that quote a couple of times in his own talks, and I found that very interesting. And if you continue going through that same quotation, Maddox even accuses Rupert of being a heretic,
Yes.
and deservedly so in his opinion. And I thought, is science about open-minded inquiry, or has it become this hardened dogmatism and ideology where free inquiry is shut down, and you have to, believe certain paradigms? I had this very interesting experience over the weekend. I attended a party, and it was hosted by a geologist who teaches at a local university. And there were lots of scientists there. So biologists, geologists, computer scientists. So I made my way around the party asking each person what they thought about this. Do you think science is open-minded to free inquiry, or do you think it has hardened into dogmatism and ideology? And it was fascinating, the responses that I received. Some people were very open-minded and curious about this idea and wanted to engage with me in conversation. And other people became very uncomfortable as they saw my line of questioning was heading toward the metaphysical. You know, science, for instance, uses as its metaphors that the world is mechanistic, it's very machine-like, and that it runs on a kind of operating system, these immutable laws. I said, do you recognize these as strictly anthropomorphic metaphors?
Mhm.
And but it was quickly going to the metaphysical, and some people got uncomfortable with that line of questioning, and then some people right away were very, very hostile toward these questions. They didn't like me asking this stuff at all. But then I noticed there was another interesting breakdown. The
Mm.
older people, I would say 40 and older, were much more receptive to my questioning, and the younger people were the most hostile to what I
Oh,
was
really?
asking.
Very interesting.
Right. I thought, boy, now that's an interesting
Mm.
sociological phenomenon right there, which is odd because Maddox, who knows, he'd be 100 years old, I'm sure by now, much older. I'm sure he would be incredibly hostile to my questioning of these things. So I'm sure Rupert Sheldrake is always questioning this stuff. But anyway, in the final analysis, it's science sets itself up as a sort of belief system. Um, it's almost like a secular religion, and the scientists are like a sort of priesthood masking their concepts in this language that most ordinary people cannot understand. So that's where I began with the book. Can does science hold all of the final answers? And I become skeptical of that myself. Just a little bit of background. I went to Catholic schools all my life, or was sent there by my parents. And I became really disillusioned with institutionalized religion. And in the early 2000s, like I think a lot of younger people at the time, I was younger, I'm in my 50s now, but early 2000s, I came under the sway of the new atheist movement. and
Mhm.
especially Dawkins, Hitchens, who is at least an entertaining debater, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett. I was impressed with his
Mhm.
thinking.
Very interesting.
Yes, a great writer, worth reading. I think they're all worth reading, but they were, after a while, philosophically, it just was no longer interesting to me. It just seemed very reductionist and dismissive and contemptuous. And then I discovered Rupert Sheldrake. I discovered Bernardo Kastrup, uh, Stephen Meyer, who wrote something called Return of the God Hypothesis. I just found
When,
all
wa-
of the
when, wa-
stuff.
when was that?
It's called Return of the God
No, no, no.
Hypothesis.
When was that when you started to reach Sheldrake and Kastrup? Approximately?
Probably about 5 years ago, I would
Oh, yeah.
say. So not very long. Although with Sheldrake especially, I became an avid fan, and I think we communicated through email. I got his books on spiritual practices. His book on science set free is the title in the United States, at least. I think it has a different title in the UK. Rupert, or I'm sorry,
Science. Yeah.
Bernardo, I also found very interesting. Started reading some of his books, and that was it for me. I thought, this is a new way. It's much more creative, open-minded, and Rupert himself seems very kind.
Hmm.
And Hitchens could be abrasive. Two totally different styles.
Right. But was there a kind of or could you remember some kind of focal event that shifted your attention away from the new atheist movement, or was it more like a sort of gradual process?
Yeah, I can't point, thinking back right now on the spot, I don't think there was any particular moment. Um, it was probably a more gradual evolution. As I started reading more deeply about some of these ideas, especially with Rupert, that science is not a metaphor-free enterprise
Hmm.
that relies heavily on these anthropomorphic metaphors, which are incredibly misleading to the general public. Um, if the world, for instance, is machine-like, who created the machine? Machines typically have purposes, but science says, no, no, the machine has absolutely no purpose. The laws are immutable. They came into being automatically at the moment of the Big Bang. But who created the laws? Science would say no one created the laws. Um, so all of this, I don't think, was adding up very well to me. It wasn't intellectually satisfying. It wasn't philosophically satisfying. So, but
Yeah,
no
yeah, please,
particular
okay.
event or date,
Was that?
no particular event,
Yeah.
inspired me.
But as far as your literary career is concerned, how has that developed? What have you been your major kind of leading lights in that enterprise? The favorite writers and themes.
Okay, well, I started writing at a very early age, and I just never stopped. I think I sent out my very first short story in an attempt to get published when I was 14 years old. And my early influences, well, maybe this um, brought me back to more metaphysical questions. When I was a kid, we didn't really have YA back in the 1970s and 80s. It's a big
What's that?
phenomenon. YA, it's a genre. It's short for young adult.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So, young adult
Right.
novels and things, very big business today. But when I was a kid, not much of that was around. And I gravitated, who knows why, to people like Stephen King at first and H.P. Lovecraft. I don't
Hmm.
know if you
Yeah, yes,
read.
of course. That's Wellebeck's kind of favorite writer.
I think these guys were asking, in some sense, big metaphysical questions. Stephen King, for instance, is all about. It's nominally about horror, but it's the supernatural, ghosts, demons. I came under the sway of. There was a movie in the early 1980s called Poltergeist. It was produced by Steven Spielberg, and I just remember being flabbergasted by this movie. Um, Stanley Kubrick was always an early favorite of mine. I think Stanley Kubrick is like the Beethoven of filmmakers. I just love his stuff. And The Shining
Oh yeah,
came out.
oh my God. Oh my God, that was film, wasn't it?
And all of my classmates were obsessed with that film. And, you know, I was lucky enough to see it on the big screen recently. It was re-released and beautifully restored. So I'd always seen it on a small screen television, but now I see it on the big screen. There's this incredible episode. I think it's one of Kubrick's best set pieces where Jack Nicholson walks into this bathroom and you see this shadowy figure behind the curtain of the bathtub, and this woman draws the curtain slowly back, and just absolutely indelible. But all of that has to do with supernatural and ghosts and demons and this sort of thing. The more than human world, I guess we can put it that way. And maybe some seed of that took hold within me, and I've just sort of discovered a lot of that in my as I grew older. For a while, I rejected all of that. My first book is called The Natural Order of Things, and it's a kind of rebellion, I think, against my Catholic upbringing.
Mm.
And I thought to myself, what is it that I'm rebelling against precisely? And I was giving this a lot of thought, and I think it was mainly aesthetic. I grew up in the post-Vatican II church,
Right.
and Catholicism had stripped away all of the artwork from the ritual. You being in Europe, I don't know if you have a greater appreciation for this or not, but you've got the great cathedrals there and these wonderful stained glass windows and the rose windows. And you walk into these spaces and right away you're blown away by this incredible sacred space. None of that was here in America. The churches were very utilitarian. Some churches today even look like office buildings. They're really kind of depressing. So you're not getting the aesthetics of the thing. You're not being. I thought that a purpose of a religion was to sort of transport you into the transcendent. And none of that was happening in my Catholic upbringing at all. None of the beautiful music. It wasn't as though we were here listening to Bach, a Bach mass, or Mozart's Requiem or something like this. It was usually a couple of nuns at the front of the church who were strumming guitars. And by that time, the nuns weren't even wearing the habits. They were just wearing these secular civilian clothes. So, it was sort of a depressing upbringing in a lot of ways. So my first book, I'm sort of lampooning a lot of that. And then my second book, The Captive Condition, has a lot of horror, H.P. Lovecraft elements. But then I get to the third book, Bridge of Dreams, where I'm coming back now, I think, to the metaphysical, the philosophical. Is there something transcendent? Looking for something more positive rather than something that's a bit cynical, I think, with my first book, at least. It was a little dark, a little too shadowy. So I'm looking for the light in the darkness now. I think I could put it that way.
Yeah. I read some reviews of your book, and I understood that you are writing, or at least I've got attention or feeling that you are writing about situation where today in a modern world we slightly moved away from religion, from spirituality, and at the same time people are yearning for something bigger. And what do you think? What could be the way to find back this transcendent world or spirituality, or get this connection?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so my book, I think, is an attempt to work some of that out. I cannot say. I don't have the hubris enough to say that here's the way forward.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think it's all got to be experimental. And I like Joseph Campbell a lot, and he said it's got to be collective. it might have to be a bottom-up approach where we all come to some sort of conclusion about what is the way forward spiritually for us. He thought maybe it's nature.
You mean Campbell?
I like, well, I think that's a definite possibility. I was thinking a little bit about this the other day. I go on these long bike rides. It helps me to clear my mind. Sometimes I'll go 15, 20 miles. But, today we're thinking a lot about climate change and things, but I was thinking on a more practical level, some of the stuff that affects us is light pollution and noise pollution. Right. We can't get away from any of that. We don't know solitude. It's constant chatter all around us. We can't still our minds. I think we have to find a way to still our minds. And maybe one way to do that is through solitude. But there are very few spaces where you can like walk into a wilderness and just experience nature and listen to nature sounds rather than the sounds of automobiles and buses and trains and motorcycles. We're constantly being distracted, in other words. Music, we have access to music anytime we want now with things like Spotify, YouTube, all of that sort of thing. And then the light pollution thing. Anatomically modern human beings have been around for hundreds of thousands of years, maybe. I saw one estimate, 250,000 years. For all of that time, we had access to the stars. We always looked at the night sky, and it was magical. And animate even, we attributed some sort of purpose to all of that. But now very, very few people have access to the night sky. Where I live, Northeast Ohio, as a matter of fact, this is quite incredible. The people on the International Space Station can always point out Northeast Ohio because it's so consumed by lights. There's several metropolitan areas that are clustered close together, so it's completely bathed in light. You can't see the stars at all. So, we've been robbed of that nature experience of solitude, the stars, that magic that people must have experienced when they saw all of that. So I think that might be one possibility to bring us back to the spiritual. Solitude, nature, peace of mind, stilling the mind, getting rid of the chatter. That's one possibility. Right. I think my book tries to address some of that.
Yeah. But let's come to the book now. You gave a broad outline of how your ideas have developed, but more specifically to the Bridge of Dreams now. How did this novel take shape, and what's the process behind the Bridge of Dreams? I understand that the first story was there, and then you started to build on that. And also for the readers who haven't read the book, please just give up some sort of overview. What's going on there, and how do you see the book yourself?
Sure. I would describe it almost as dreamlike, where the stories, there's some workmanship quality to creative writing where you're consciously making an effort to create sentences and choosing the correct words and developing your paragraphs. But the core ideas themselves just come spontaneously and naturally. And this novel started off as just, I think, maybe 24 separate short stories. And I had no idea how they were going to fit together. It's almost as though the human mind is a receiver, and I'm just receiving these strange ideas that come outside the ego. It's not as though I'm consciously willing them into existence. It's like, oh, here's a weird idea that I just had, and I'll write it down, and I'll create a 5-10 page short story. I'll send it out, maybe it gets published, and then I write another one and another one. I just listen to that dreamlike entity that's entering my brain. Well, after a while, I had all of these short stories, and I began to notice a kind of pattern, and I started putting them together, and well, this story can go here and this other story can go before that one, and just shifting them around. Now we're getting into the intellectual part of the writing business, and becomes more like pattern recognition. You're almost working like a scientist in some sense at that point. But the first story, I think, was the first one that came together pretty easily, coherently. And then the second, and then the third, but they're not chronological. So then I started playing around with, should I tell the story chronologically? And I tried that out and I read through the work. It didn't seem to work. I thought it worked better by beginning sort of right in the middle, which is another kind of dreamlike thing. Why is that? Memories certainly don't work chronologically. They sort of jump all over the place. And it just seemed to work for me. When I work with editors, we talk about this. Some things just click. You just know. It's like with music, the rhythm of the thing just seems to work well. And it's not artificial. It feels just much more organic and natural. And so that's what happened with this book. Like, oh, it's not chronological, but it does seem to work well. I'm going to stick with this. I just have this intuitive sense that it's working. Send it out into the world, and maybe this will resonate with readers. It seems to be resonating a bit more, this book, with people than my other books. It's getting very positive reviews from people, whereas my other books received very mixed reviews. So I'm happy. I think I'm making a connection with people.
Bernardo Kastrup was very fond of. How did you get into contact with him?
So I was reading a couple of Bernardo's books. I think the first one, I don't have it in front of me. Oh, yes, it's called More Than Allegory. And there he's considering mythology and how that works into the human enterprise. And I thought, boy, I like this Bernardo guy a lot. I looked up his publisher, IFF Books, and sent Bridge of Dreams to IFF Books. I had no idea Bernardo was the publisher. It's his imprint. And so I sent it off and received a letter from Bernardo saying, I really thought this was a delightful book. It reminded me of The Master and Margarita by Bulgakov. And I couldn't believe it. And then I saw, only later did I realize, oh my God, Bernardo, this is his own personal imprint with this bigger publisher called Collective Inc. And he wanted to publish the book. I said, oh, wonderful. So that's how it came into being. So Bernardo and I have only had a couple of email exchanges, but I hope maybe one day to meet him or speak to him through Zoom or something.
Right.
I'm sure a very busy guy, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
He runs a foundation and publishes books like crazy. I mean, very prolific.
Yeah, I have a very general question that what inspires you as a writer? What is the thing passionates you?
Well, specifically with Bridge of Dreams, for instance, my daughter was my muse, and I wanted to write something for my daughter. I dedicated the book to her, and she's my biggest fan for this book.
How old is she?
She just graduated from college. But I think when I first started writing it, I was a little heartbroken. She went away to college her freshman year, and I didn't realize she's our only child. And what a hole that left in my heart. I thought, well, this is just the natural process. The kid goes away to college. But it was very painful for me. So I started writing these stories about the experience of a young woman who goes through multiple lifetimes, someone that I would consider a seeker, someone looking for meaning and purpose in the universe. And always in the back of my mind, I had my daughter's image, and how would she react to this book? Would she like this? Would she find it touching? I sent her a very early draft of the book that she read late one night. She read through the whole book in one sitting, and I get this phone call, Zoom kind of thing, or I guess FaceTime they call it. And she's just sobbing, the tears are coming down her. She was so moved by the book. And I thought, finally, I've written something successful. I've connected with a young person, and maybe other people will like it as well. So, my daughter really inspired me that time. And, with my first book, I was inspired by my own upbringing. I went to a Jesuit high school here in the States, and that was quite the experience. I could tell you, if you've ever spent some time with the Jesuits, I like to say it was very similar to joining the American Marines. They were very uncompromising. The philosophy there was, let's break the boy of his very bad habits, and then try to rebuild the person so that he becomes a fully grown, mature man with a lot of good habits. There's something positive to say, but I'll tell you, it was a terrifying experience for a 14-year-old boy to walk into this. This was back in the 1980s, and the priest would scream and yell at you and get your act together, that kind of thing. Now, this was an all-boys school, so I will say, imagine trying to educate 1,000 teenage boys. You need a lot of law and order to make this work. And so they were pretty tough. But I think it worked. A lot of the graduates from my high school have gone on to insanely successful careers. There's a congressman who graduated in my class. He's a congressman in California right now. A couple of filmmakers. One guy's the producer of a television show called The Family Guy. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It was popular. I don't think it's as popular these days, but and I'm a novelist, so go figure. I don't think they were happy with that first book. They found out about it, and I think they saw it as a sort of betrayal. So I'm thinking I need to send them my newest book, Bridge of Dreams, and get back into their good graces.
Now, you're still a Catholic?
I'll tell you, I am not a huge fan personally of institutionalized religion. I think it might be. Oh, here's a good connection with Rupert. He was saying that he spent a lot of time in India, and he was drawn to Hinduism or Vedantic philosophy, as I am as well. I love reading like the Bhagavad Gita. I'm trying to get through like the Mahabharata, which is massive. The translation I have is like 10 volumes. It's still kind of interesting though. Despite its age and length, I'm still connecting a bit with it. But Rupert said he's never going to be a Hindu. That's just not going to work. And he was advised by some rishi, I think, while he was staying in an ashram there, that no, it's best if you go back to your own tradition, and you can still connect with these great spiritual ideas that way. I don't know, for me, Catholicism still isn't quite working. I return to the texts a lot. I'm reading like new translations of the Gospels and things, but I'm more drawn to people like Alan Watts. I don't know if you
Alan. Of course.
That's just great stuff. I was just looking at his book on Zen Buddhism. But I don't know, how far can text take you without ritual, without that collective experience, without singing, without chanting, without holy days. It's just reading and reading and reading. As a matter of fact, to prepare for this interview, I found myself reading and reading, and I thought, this is becoming counterproductive. I'm just filling my brain with lots and lots of information, and at some point you hit a brick wall. It's like, how much can I read? How much can I memorize? And religion should be about direct experience. It shouldn't necessarily be an intellectual endeavor. It should be an emotional thing. But thus far, with institutionalized religion like Catholicism, I'm not feeling the emotion. I mean, that could change, obviously. You know, what's funny too is I'm often asked to deliver eulogies at funerals. I've become kind of famous for this, giving all of these eulogies in Catholic churches. I don't want to get known for that, but you know, but it does seem to resonate with people on an emotional level, which I think is what it's all about.
Right, there was one when I read this passage that I sent you an email also half an hour ago. I realized that you must have some kind of Christian background. So the passage from there's a passage in your book that a properly Hellenized intellectual from a prosperous merchant family. Paul was an early adopter, some have plausibly argued inventor of a radical new philosophy, Levantine Buddhism. That was an interesting finding. I haven't read where I encountered that kind of concept. But basically, could you please kind of that was these were the musings of Mr. Watts, if I remember, from the first story, right?
Yeah, so that's my homage to Alan Watts. I have a character
Yeah,
named Watts.
yeah.
Now
I
the
realized
passage the passage that you cite is completely fictitious. I just sort of made that up. And I think I specifically was thinking there's this story in the Gospels that I've always been intrigued by, where Jesus goes out into the wilderness and he's called into the wilderness by the Spirit, however you wish to define that. He's not called by God, he's not called by the angels. Uh, he's called by the Spirit. What is that? It almost felt to me like the Tao. He was called out into the wilderness. And I also remembered Rupert Sheldrake saying this. It may have been with an interview with you, as a matter of fact, where he said, you know, people like Jesus and Buddha, they didn't go off to the university.
Yeah.
Buddha didn't get enlightened by doing a PhD. I like that.
They're not writing PhDs. This is not an intellectual endeavor. You go out into the wilderness, you sit underneath the Bodhi tree, you fast, you meditate, and then something happens. I thought, oh, and then there is this Indian guru who you may know the name. He wrote Autobiography of a Yogi.
Yeah, I haven't read it, but I know him.
He's got this fantastic 2-volume analysis of the Bhagavad Gita too. It's just incredible. But he does the same thing to the Gospels, and he's got this theory: the missing years of Jesus. We know Jesus, when he was 12, began preaching in a temple, and people thought this kid is a prodigy, quite amazing. But then you never hear from Jesus again until he's, you know, roughly 30 years old. Well, where was he? Well, the author of Autobiography of a Yogi speculates, well, Jesus was a carpenter who went off with his father along the Silk Road and ended up in India. And for all of those years, he was being taught by the great yogis and the rishis of India. And then he comes back. And so it's a sort of, in some sense, Hellenized Vedantic philosophy or Buddhism or something like that.
All right.
And then Paul picks this up and begins spreading this word, you know, seek within. You'll find some answers there. So, and I was just having fun with that concept.
That's,
you know, like I said, it's
yeah.
you know, it's fiction, but an interesting possibility. I like to think maybe Jesus did go off to India. There is a tradition in Catholicism, right, that St. Thomas, the Apostle Thomas, went off to India. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility.
Yeah, as I understood, you are getting more and more interested in those big metaphysical questions. What could be your next idea for your book? Is it already clear, or what? Are you working already on this? Or?
It is. I have a whole book in mind, and I pretty much have it outlined in my head from start to finish. But now the problem is I have to sit down and write the thing. And this is going to take a long time. It's very, it's kind of a painful process because I labor over sentences over and over and over again. I love good prose. I like kind of a prose poetry. So I want to try to get every word correct, and I want the sentences to vary, and that's just very hard intellectual work. The fun part of writing is just thinking of all the ideas, or rather letting the ideas seep into your brain. I have typed some stuff out. I do have a rough outline, but I would estimate to at least produce a draft. It's going to take, a bad draft is like 6 months. And one problem for me is I have to give myself permission to write a bad draft. If I sit there and I think everything has got to be beautiful and perfect, I'll just get frustrated. So that's what I'm dealing with now. It's like I have to leave that behind. I have to get rid of the ego that wants a perfect work of art. And I just have to allow myself to write garbage. But great writing, I always tell my students this, great writing is really about rewriting, and it's like polishing a gem. And it just takes time. So I do have something. One thing that I would like to accomplish with my new book is I want to get rid of all the intellectual sort of highbrow stuff, and I just want it to be pure story. I don't want any sort of metafiction, postmodernist kind of stuff. With Bridge of Dreams, everything is sort of interconnected, and you're trying to look for how does the first story relate to the third story. I have a prologue and a transcript. I'm playing these games like Vladimir Nabokov would play, this metafiction stuff. I'm trying to draw attention in some ways to fiction as an artificial experience. But I just want to get rid of all of that and just tell a pure story without any intellectual highbrow stuff. Just totally immersive. And if the story works, it works. And if not, that's just how it goes.
So whom do you read nowadays? Who are the leading lights? You mentioned in earlier in your career King and Lovecraft, but what's the
There's this American author named William Faulkner who said this. I hope this doesn't sound too presumptuous on my part, because Faulkner was a truly, truly great genius. But he said he did all of his reading fiction in his 20s and 30s. I found that to be the case for me as well. I read a lot of fiction in my 20s, 30s, maybe early 40s. But for the last 10 years, I've been reading primarily nonfiction. From the early 2000s on, really. So I started with Hitchens, Dawkins, Harris, Daniel Dennett, moved to Sheldrake, Bernardo Kastrup, Stephen Meyer, a lot of science, a lot of philosophy. Fiction, what I've read recently, I highly recommend this. I think it's a great, great work of art, is Kazuo Ishiguro. It's a British writer. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And I think he won it on the strength of two novels, The Remains of the Day.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, great. Just a beautiful book.
Already.
And Never Let Me Go, which is another just extraordinary book. Thinking about that, I said to myself, I'm not a huge fan of particular authors, but I do like particular books that some authors have written. So for Ishiguro, those two books, there's a writer named Cormac McCarthy, hugely popular in the States at least. I'm not wild about all of his books, but I love Blood Meridian, which I think asks the big questions, and it's really about the big theological problem of evil. If there is a kind and loving God, why is there so much evil in the world? I actually spoke to a philosopher who I think he had a little bit of an argument with Bernardo. They may have had a falling out, as a matter of fact. This philosopher posed an interesting question. He said, if the cosmologists are correct and the universe truly is roughly 14 billion years old. It's had all of this time to create intelligent beings such as ourselves, and galaxy after galaxy after galaxy populated with all of these stars and planets. Why couldn't the universe figure out the problem of evil and put an end to it? Why is it still here? I think Cormac McCarthy in a thing like Blood Meridian is considering a question like this. It must be part of the fabric of the cosmos. You can't. Joseph Campbell even says you're never ever going to get rid of the problem of suffering. We're stuck with it, and the job of the writer is to put himself or herself on the path of life, and life is always about good things happen, but suffering also happens. You must accept both things. It must be built into the fabric of the cosmos as kind of metaphysical law. So I was inspired by that particular book. I don't know what else I've read late. Right now I'm reading a new translation of the Iliad by Emily Wilson. Not too many women have translated the Iliad, so I thought, well, this is a great opportunity to get a female take on this great epic. I think it's very informative. It's helped me in my understanding of that. I love that book, by the way. God, now, there is a book about suffering. That's all the book really is about. I think Homer is a great philosopher, too. He's like, all right, here's a book about suffering. Why are these people suffering? Well, it's because they desire status. They desire beautiful sexual partners, which is really what the opening book is about of the Iliad, who's got the hottest captive woman. They want recognition. They want money. That's a big part of the opening chapter of the Iliad. They want material wealth and gain. And they're all dying. It's this horrific bloodbath. When I first read the Iliad, I thought, my God, this is just like World War I. Really, what he's talking about here or describing is trench warfare. And he'll zoom in on the no man's land where people are just slaughtering each other en masse. It's just, horrible stuff. All right, so what's the positive message there? And I think Homer, at the end of the Iliad, says, just a moment of human decency. Achilles has killed Hector, and Hector's father, Priam, comes begging for his son's body to give his son a proper burial. If you remember the beginning of the Iliad, Homer describes bodies laying all over the body field, and it's a feast for the birds and for the dogs. And then juxtapose that with the final chapter of the Iliad, where a father is coming for the body of his son so he can bury his son. And Achilles acquiesces and says, yes, I'll allow this to happen. Just this chapters and chapters of horror, but this moment of human decency and this agreed upon set of ethics and morals. And, maybe these people will move forward. But then, of course, you get to the Greek tragedians, and it gets pretty bad from there as well. But so the Iliad, as you can see, I'm not big on light reading. Maybe I should pick up like a good mystery story once in a while. But it's just how my brain operates, I think. I just like the big questions.
There's one writer that's just appeared on my personal radar recently, Colin Wilson. Do you know anything? Just a side. Have you read anything? What do you think of him? I've just literally heard about the name a few months ago and getting interested in him.
Yeah, didn't Colin Wilson write a book on the occult?
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
I've seen that. I've never read Colin Wilson, and I think he may also have written a book about the whole angry young man genre. Was just getting underway before Catcher in the Rye and all of this stuff. And so that would have been what, the 1950s or so?
Yeah. Angry young man generation kind of.
Well, so I know it, but I have not read Colin.
But since the word came up, the occult, what's your take on the occult? What do you understand by what's the occult for you?
let me here, I'll show you something. Right after I wrote my book, my daughter gave me this. I don't know if you could see this. It's like a tarot card.
Yeah.
It's like a little stained glass thing, the magician. So I keep this above my writing desk. It's like a kind of talisman in some ways. The tarot as a cult. I don't know that I'm drawn to all of that stuff, but I am fascinated by the tarot and the images of the tarot as a kind of like the Jungian concept of the collective archetypes of the unconscious. These are not working on a conscious level, it's working at the level of the human species. I mean, these images are so deeply ingrained. So if you look at the tarot, you've got the hermit, you have the magician, you have the devil, you have the lovers. These are images that are kind of part of our DNA that transcend the personal. I think stories are built on these images, and the writer is trying to string these images together in such a way that it makes sense as a narrative that is satisfying. As a matter of fact, there's this guy I really recommend. His name is Christopher Booker, and he wrote a book called The Seven Basic Plots. And there he argues that you have to write either a quest story or one that's like a voyage and return story, that or a resurrection or redemption story, one that might be like about forgiveness, and that we follow these archetypal patterns. I think maybe the occult taps into a lot of that. It sees these grand images or narratives and tries to explore those. At least with the tarot, I think that's definitely very, very true. So I do have several books on the tarot. Once in a while, I'll draw a card and just sort of reflect on it. I just selected a card the other day, and the image is of a man. It looks like he's undergone a lot of labor. He's been working a long, long time, and he's gazing at the products of his labor, and he's sort of contemplating this. And the contemplation is, was it worth all of that effort? And so he's looking at the past, all of the effort that he's put into his work, and then he's considering the future. Do I move on? Do I continue working very hard to try to create something else, even though there's no guarantee of success? So I was thinking about, now there is an archetype for you. Should I write another book? Will anyone publish the book? If it gets published, will I find readers? Will it be reviewed? It's a constant struggle. So tarots, I think, tap into these deep, deep images, and the occult in general, maybe. But I've never gotten any deeper than that with the occult.
Right. Anything from you before we start to?
I have a question. Did I understood correctly that you are a professor at university and giving lectures today as well?
I do. I teach at multiple universities here in Northeast Ohio. It's kind of a bad time for the universities. There are big financial crises going on. I think this is a long time in coming. The universities have had some there's a lot of fiscal irresponsibility. They embarked upon building projects where they're putting together huge sports stadiums and state-of-the-art dormitories where they're trying to sell students on the experience of going to college rather than the education. So the professors are secondary. It's all of the creature comforts of college, like a country club practically, that the universities, at least here in the States, are concerned with. So I bounce around from college to college when there's work available, and I've taught a range of classes from like remedial English, basic English, to literature, to creative writing, and graduate students enrolled in master's degree programs. So I'm teaching pretty much everything as long as it's English. I've never taught any of my books.
But just having conversations with your students, what have you noticed? What are the topics they are interested in right now?
Well, that's a big problem because I'm from such a different generation. What I'm seeing now are a lot of stories about video games, which I cannot relate to. Here in America, there's something called the Marvel movies based on comic books. And I don't know much about that sort of stuff either. So now I'm faced with this problem of how do I connect with students today? You know, another big problem I'm seeing with students is addiction to their cell phones. And so they're constantly looking at their phones during my lectures and looking at TikTok videos and things. Their brains have been colonized, I suppose, in some way by mass media and technology, and it's rewiring how they think. I'm seeing there's a crisis with the humanities as well, as fewer and fewer students in America go into the humanities. And one college where I teach has kind of become a de facto business school. We're down, for instance, to one philosophy professor, one. English departments are shrinking very rapidly, where we might only have 4 or 5 full-time professors on staff. It's mainly taught by adjunct faculty where it might be necessary to teach. So, you know, things are changing rapidly. I'm not, I suppose that's what I'm seeing from the kids too, is just, you know, an emphasis on technology. As that's their that's their reference point. You know, they've grown up since earliest childhood with well, here's a question I asked my students. I said, at what age do you think the average child is given a not a laptop, but what would you say, a tablet? Yeah, like an iPad. At what age? And a lot of them are saying 5 years old, and that it's become a sort of substitute babysitter. Or, you know, kids, it's hard work to raise children. There's no doubt about that. And you've got to put a lot of effort into it. You lose your patience a bit. And a lot of parents, I think, are like, here's an iPad. Leave me alone for a while. And that's their world. That's the world these kids have grown up in. And that's what I'm seeing a lot of with fiction now. I try to teach them slow development. Here's a big problem. I say fiction should be about the development, the slow, gradual development of the character. Your character begins one way, and by the end of the story, your character should undergo a kind of change as the result of experiencing a series of hardships and crises. You know, life is one damn thing after another. And the question is, how does your character emerge after all of those experiences? How is the character changed? You could have a tragedy where may not be positive change, or it could be something heroic where, despite all of the hardships of life, despite all of the suffering, the character continues to do something positive, goal-oriented, tries to help other people. They want to skip, the students seem to want to skip the development. I said, but that's really what stories are all about. Like, take, for instance, The Wizard of Oz. You have Dorothy, who's whisked away to a strange, different world, having been in Kansas. And really, the majority of the movie in The Wizard of Oz is her development over time as she meets people, strange characters. Some people want to help her, some people want to hurt her. And at the end, close to the end, she's faced with this absolute horror of being captured by the Wicked Witch. But she manages to get past that, and she comes to this great metaphysical realization. I think this is the reason why we still watch this movie. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. I think that's very deep. You know, at the beginning of the movie, she just dreams about escaping from home. She wants to get out of Kansas, this black and white world that she holds with absolute contempt and disdain. You know, it's as boring can be. It's this black and white world. And then she goes through an experience. She develops as a character. And at the end, she says, there's no place like home. you know. It's just so touching to me. I just love that. I say to my students, what we're really concerned with is that middle section, the Oz part, where we get the development of the character. But they just skip right past all of that. They just want to go right to the end. It's Alan Watts said, it's a little bit like you attend the symphony and all you want is the finale. What's the purpose of that? You want, I'm very lucky. I don't know if you like classical music, but I'm in Cleveland, Ohio, and we have one of the greatest orchestras in the world here. And I am a subscriber. I try to go to every concert I can, and just listening to this. And so the other thing is, you're not multitasking when you're listening to the Cleveland Orchestra. You're totally focused on the music for an hour, you know, whatever a Mahler symphony might be, and you really get the sense of an experience by the end of the thing. You know, I've been absolutely blown away by this. But fiction should do the same thing. Give the people an experience.
Right. Your interview will appear in the 56th issue of a newspaper, and for each issue we have a central theme. And because we have interview with you, and your book is, the title of your book is Bridge of Dreams, and your book is heavy on dreams. And so we'll take a dream as a key theme for the whole issue. Any kind of impromptu remarks on dreams? I mean, it's I mean, there's a huge subject, but a few off-the-cuff remarks, how you see how you see dreams, what's the function of them, or anything that really kind of first associations that come to your mind.
Well, I like the little clip you sent me of Rupert saying that when we die, it might be like being lost again into a dream. And, you know, it's funny, right before the interview, I was just paging through Carl Jung's, it's called The Collective Works of Jung, but it was edited by Joseph Campbell. And I stumbled upon his remarks about dreams. And it's very Zen-like, where Jung says dreams are spontaneous and natural. It's not as though today I'm going to schedule a particular dream for this evening. Tonight I would like to dream about the following, and then next week I think I'll dream about this, and the following week I think I'll schedule this other dream and just have that experience. It's not how it works, you know. There's something happening. It seems to come from outside of us in some ways. That's a lot how creative writing works. You know, the silly question sometimes it's posed by students is, where do you get your ideas? And, you know, I can't say I get them from anywhere. They're very, very much like a dream where they happen spontaneously. Although I have found that, you know, Rupert in his book on spiritual practices talks about meditation, and the thing that you're doing, I mean, it's so important. The thing about meditation is you try to get rid of all of your ideologies, try to get rid of your dogmas, try to get rid of your prejudices and your assumptions, and get rid of that stuff, the ego consciousness stuff. And what you find happening is you're getting more and more into this sort of collective realm, this kind of consciousness that transcends the ego. I think that's where the creative stuff happens. That's where the dream stuff is happening as well. So, you know, that was my take on dreams. It's just spontaneous and natural. It's not artificial. It's not constructed. I've been thinking about this too with Bernardo. Maybe there is this realm of consciousness, and we're like waves on that ocean of consciousness, and we briefly appear as a wave, and then we sink back into that consciousness. Meditation, creativity, dreams, it's like we're sinking back into that gigantic ocean, only to reappear again as ego consciousness. But then we drift back into, and we seem to need this. I think, isn't it true? Scientists have absolutely no idea why we sleep. And I think that Vedantic philosophy even says, why is it that we have dreamless sleep? I mean, it's so deep. What purpose is that serving? And we're disappearing back into this vast, vast ocean, and then we come back again. For me, like I said, I go on these very long bike rides, and after a while, you're no longer thinking about all of the ego stuff. And did I say the right thing during this interview? I hope I didn't offend someone. And how's my book doing? Did it get a good review today? You just get rid of that and then sink back into the dream. And then you come back and then you got to put it on paper. That's the ego part. Although I will say one thing here, I invested in a typewriter, and it's been wonderfully liberating because the problem with a computer is you always have the tendency to, oh, I want to check Facebook or Twitter, or I'm going to watch a little video where you're interviewing Rupert again, or so. It's like, no, the typewriter, there is no screen. So that helps facilitate the dream, I think. It's what William James called a stream or a flow of consciousness. Just let it just flow. Do you know the great composer John Williams?
No, I don't.
Well, I'm sure you do, because he wrote the music to Jaws, to Star Wars, Close Encounters, Lost Ark. And he said, the important thing for the creative person is to work past the writer's block. And that's a nice thing about a typewriter. You're just typing and typing and typing. You're getting and you're at some point you enter back into the dream. It's the flow. So I think that's my perspective on dreams, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting when you, it's just a very last question. Interesting when you explain the ego, like ego consciousness emerging from the collective consciousness. And that's just led my thoughts to Aldous Huxley and his notion or his take on consciousness, individual and collective. And that and since we started with Rupert Sheldrake, that reminded me of a quote by Rupert that Aldous Huxley is one of the key figures in this great transformation in the midst of which we find ourselves right now. I mean, how do you, just a very last question, how do you just please kind of unpack or comment on that? Aldous Huxley as being one of the key figures in this great transformation in where we find ourselves now.
Yeah, I read The Doors of Perception last summer, and then Aldous Huxley's book, Heaven and Hell, and they were very instructive. And there, Huxley says ego consciousness more or less is a reduction valve, where there probably is this ocean of consciousness, but ego consciousness is very, very tiny. Alan Watts compares it to a flashlight. And it's a very, very narrow beam, and it's directed at very specific things, and it's really mainly helping us to survive. But meanwhile, we're ignoring everything else that's possibly available to us through this other form of consciousness if we could tap into it. You know, Huxley, Rupert Sheldrake, Bernardo, they all talk about, say, psychedelics as a liberating possibility that your mind suddenly opens up. It's no longer that narrow beam of light, which is ego consciousness. What is it? I guess ego consciousness would be left brain. Is that correct? Where it's strictly about problem solving is what the ego does. I'm faced with a bunch of problems. How do I earn a living? How do I get to work today? This road is closed. And you're maneuvering through this map of life. And that's one way of living. But now keep in mind, on an evolutionary scale, we never had to deal with any of these problems. I heard Terence McKenna talk about this just recently in an old interview. He said for hundreds of thousands of years, human beings have had their minds open to nature and to the world. And it's only been in the last, 5,000 years that we've lived in cities and that we've had to worry about how to mass produce food and feed ourselves and, labor and jobs. And all of that's ego consciousness, which has completely taken over our minds. Ian McGilchrist, possibly, who's talked about this. We've been fooled for hundreds or maybe a few thousand years now that that's the only form of consciousness that is permitted. And it's about time that we see these other forms of consciousness. Huxley was maybe one of the first to point this out. I think his book is wonderful. It's very accessible. Anyone can read it. He's also got a great book called The Perennial Philosophy, which I highly recommend, just about all of the world's spiritual traditions and how they connect. So, maybe we'll go through a revolution. Maybe my book, Bernardo always publishes nonfiction. And I believe my book is the first work of fiction that he has published, it's the first novel. Fiction is a great way of communicating with larger audiences, I think, possibly in the nonfiction. So I'm hoping this finds an audience. I'm so grateful that you read my book and that you thought I was worth speaking to. It's just an incredible opportunity and privilege. So I'm extraordinarily grateful that you took the time to do this.
Yeah, and and the same applies to us. We're also very grateful that you found time, and it was a pleasure to converse with you. And